Welcome to my 2022 Conceptual Framework presentation. Up first, I have things for my EdL 350 section. So first up, here's my section where I tried to talk about diversity and cultural differences. And I took some things from Creating Welcoming Schools, one of the books that we read, and reflected on those. And I connected it back to Mirrors and Windows, which is displaying students' cultures and identities in the classroom, and also exposing them to cultures and identities different from themselves. And I also tried to reflect on things that I could do to engage parents in the classroom culture, such as asking them to tell about their child in a letter, or home-to-school literacy portfolios, which is a way to display how literacy is taught at home, or letting students lead parent-teacher conferences or making them a part of them. Because I think it's important to create connections between the teacher and students' families. I also put in some reflections I made on my demographics paper, because after learning about my students and their cultural backgrounds, I definitely thought that I have more experience in teaching a culturally diverse classroom. I also put in some notes on how I think affirmation helps me form those relationships with my students. Affirmation is acknowledging the personhood of our students through words and actions. And I try to do this in my classroom just by listening to students and just showing them that I'm interested in their experiences. I also reflected on trust and saying that that's probably the most important thing for me in building a relationship between my students, especially students of color. And it's easy for me to do, at least, listening to them and showing them that I care about their experiences. Here's another section of my CF that I included in diversity and inclusion, because it talks a lot about my thoughts on no more low expectations for English learners. I put in a lot of notes from what I gained from the not this, do this, or what works for students who come into the classrooms who speak other languages, because I learned a lot about this from experiencing this with my students in my 4th grade classroom. And from this book, I learned more about how difficult it is for students to move to a country where you don't speak the language. And even though I can't fully understand some of my students' experiences, I learned a lot more about it from this book, learning some things that are misconceptions or things about ELs that teachers don't understand. And I also learned that building students' grasp of academic knowledge can be improved by learning even just a little of their native language. It shows those students that I care about them and that I value their gifts that they bring from their other countries, from their other cultures. I also took some things from your article, Embracing to Create Curriculum, Levels of Engagement Among Student Teachers, because the journal article made it clear that even student populations get more diverse in big cities, teachers still are mostly comprised of white women. And I thought that was important to remember and take away from my teaching experience. Here's a part of my conceptual framework where I reflected on something that I read in the Read the World text that we had, which was inspiring students to take action against something. This is when students learn about a certain topic or a certain issue, and then they go public or try to make an impact on that issue to work for change. And I really liked that. I thought that it's a good way for students to fix a problem and not just learn about them in social studies or SEL. I was thinking of something like the environment or something like racism, something that students are passionate about, that they can work towards change. And I think that's a great way for students to realize that they can make a change in the world. And it also supports understanding and empathy and promotes that within the classroom. I also have a section here about building understanding with multimedia text, or using something like age-appropriate websites or YouTube videos or databases to support learning and not just getting certain things from the internet. And then just briefly, here's a part of my CF where I talk a lot about growth mindset. It's actually a small section in my CF, but I think it's really important because I did take a lot away from the growth mindset videos that we watched. How growth mindset is the belief that your abilities can get better through dedication and hard work. And that's something that I struggle with. I do not always think, hey, you can do this, you're going to get better. But I do think it's really important to instill that in students. And I put this in here just to remind myself. And I also put some quotes or some phrases that I can say to my students to promote growth mindset in my classroom, such as, you're going to learn these new vocab words and I'm going to make sure you know these words. You don't know how to do that yet, but we will learn. You can do this. Or what else can we work towards to being able to do this? Because I think having a growth mindset will be very important for making my students successful. Alright, that was my EdL 350 section, and now here are some excerpts from my Ed Reading 350 section. I had a whole section of this that talks about differentiated instruction and some things that I thought I could do in my classroom to differentiate my instruction. So differentiated instruction, I have the definition. So a teaching approach designed to teach to a student's different learning needs. For my class, I think this could be planning ahead to change a lesson based on what a particular student needs. So for example, one of the students in my small reading group reads ahead a lot, so I tried to plan to give him worksheets to go back to summarize chapters just to monitor his comprehension, because I think that's something that he needs for his reading level. I also connected this to the helpful method, which is responding and connecting using visual tools. This could be recording students speaking to use in a video, which I've done for tutoring, and also making kind and productive video comments, or creating an infographic to summarize learning. And some things that I've seen in my classroom are things like playing a video at the beginning of new lessons, or using real objects to represent masses of things that we're learning in math class. And I've also seen her make connections to students' families, like siblings. I've also seen my lead teacher make connections to students' backgrounds or students' cultural heritage to differentiate instruction. For my classroom, this could look like me also connecting to students' cultures and experiences, and I would also make these topics very enthusiastic and talk about them with enthusiasm, because I know if I'm not excited about a topic, then the students definitely won't be interested. I might also use the video or song strategy to introduce topics, and I did this in my week of teaching because I think that students will definitely remember things a lot better if I introduce something like that or differentiate the instruction like that. Here's a section where I tried to reflect on approaches to teaching reading and literature and tried to give my opinions on certain ways to teach this. I tried to talk a little bit about basal readers because those are the most convenient ways that teachers progress reading for their students. And I've seen this in my classroom. We have a textbook where we read a story and it introduces a new theme to reading, something usually with nonfiction. And it's usually seen as a disadvantage or not the best way to teach because they don't always connect to students' interests, or there's too much time spent on them, and it's usually only presented to benefit the students in the middle. It doesn't benefit students who are below grade reading level or above reading level. But there is another section of this CF where I reflected on one of the comments in the student-teacher article, where it said that they aren't always the best resource, but they can be made better using other resources. And I agree with that they should be supplemented with other things to support students' learning in that. I also talked about thematic units, which are units that are taught over multiple days that relate to a certain theme or topic. And it usually includes a literacy element, but it can relate to other topics like social studies, science, language arts, something like that. And I've been in classes myself where they use novels in social studies to teach about a historical era, and they also use those books when learning about grammar. And I think the theme of my unit, science, weathering and erosion, relates to that too. The theme was weathering and erosion, but it also tied back to cause and effect, which is something that students have to learn to get better at literature, at writing. And here's a section where I just went over a little bit about choosing materials in a literature approach, which I took from one of the other articles we read, which is where teachers select books for students with their input in mind. And I just went over the 3 ways that they can be read as a whole class, in small groups, or as individuals in Reader's Workshop. And I just went over the pros and cons a little bit to all 3 because there's benefits to each of them, but also negative things about each of them. And then I also went over something that I've done in class, which are conferences, which is when teachers observe students reading, ask them questions about their book, and give them feedback about their reading, what they're doing well, and what they can improve upon. And I've done this, like I said, I've done this before in my 4th grade classroom. And my students also keep a journal or a recording of what they're reading, books that they've read, things that they pick up as they read. Usually keep notes about different writing skills, such as characters or character feelings, things that they can use to enrich their reading experiences. And I think that's very important in, fostering the ways that students read. And finally, I have my section from Ed Reading 430 and my experiences in tutoring my students. So for this class, I really only included things that I learned about that I included in my tutoring sessions, such as responses to intervention or the ways that educators handle problems with struggling readers, giving them resources or extra instruction to help them succeed, which is what I believe I did in tutoring my 2 students. I also just made sure I included what running records are, assessing students' reading levels using a text that they read, and also including what sight words are, and making sure I knew that I had sight phrases for my tutoring students because I knew that this is what they would see in 4th grade books. I also included my notes, my reflection on interest inventories, which is, from what I learned, that's asking what students like and dislike about reading and writing, and what they like to do outside of school, maybe that they could read or write about. And this is something that I would definitely do in assessing my students' reading habits in my future classroom, because I think that's important in knowing what students like and what they might be interested, because I think that's important in helping them become better readers. It also just, I think, fostered a better relationship between my tutoring students and I, because it showed that I was interested in what they had to say, and I think that was important for them. So finally, I just had a section here where I reflected on some of the things that happened when I was tutoring my 2 students. I focused a lot on fluency for both of them because after doing running records with them, I realized that this was something that they both could work on. So at first I tried to do poetry books and read them out loud to them to show them what rhyme and rhythm mean and show them that this is something that makes reading sound better. But then I decided to have them practice reading in phrases and also showing them what different punctuations mean and show them that this is how we express our reading. I also tried to do some partner reading with them because I think that they could learn from each other instead of just learning from me, which also worked out okay, but I think they had little trouble giving each other feedback. But overall, it was a good experience, and I do think that they gained something from learning about the different punctuations, about making their reading sound better. But I do think that we could have spent more time with each other and that they could have gotten better at this. because one of them I've noticed still needs help pushing her eyes, getting ready for the next word. And that was my tutoring experience, but that's just a part of my conceptual framework that I definitely wanted to include. And that is my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you see everything that I've gained from these classes. Thank you.